Hello, everybody. I'm
Good
Adir
evening.
Shinawi.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Doug, and welcome to Real Talk, our space.
I'm always worried that you forget the title of our show. You like stop and I'm like, oh my God, did he forget?
Now I'm pausing for effect. Right.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Or I did forget. Yeah. We'll never
No,
know.
we'll
It's,
never
it's
know.
really called outer space, but anyway,
That's our inside joke,
I know.
remember? So we'll,
Yes.
we'll definitely do that. Maybe one day we'll
Yeah.
kind of splurge
The
as to how we got to the inside joke, but
the reveal one day.
but we'll still keep it in like discreet language.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway,
Yes.
so we are in the month of October, and October is the theme is Maryland stories, aka America in miniature, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And why is it called American? You told me that one actually. Why is
Right.
it called
So
American miniature?
apparently, Maryland, little tiny Maryland.
Hmm.
Within Maryland, you just have it's almost like a microcosm of America.
Got it.
And that's how one of the nicknames came up. So even though we're talking about Maryland stories, in essence, we're really talking about America in miniature.
Makes sense. I've
It
never
does.
heard that until now. You learn something new every day.
Yes, we
What
do.
people don't realize about the state of Maryland before it became a state, it was actually the first colony that accepted Catholics and Jews.
Mhm.
And this month, we're going to be talking about Jewish Baltimore, which is our theme and topic today. And we're going to be talking about Black Catholics in a couple of weeks, which I think is also fascinating because I didn't know Black Catholics existed until I moved to Maryland. Coming from Chicago, majority of people, were Baptist or, something else. But all the Catholics I knew were either Polish, Lithuanian, or Irish. That's
Mhm.
all I knew. But today I'm excited because we are talking about Jewish Baltimore, very rich history. Also, me being Muslim and Palestinian, people always think we have like this animosity, but we own a Jewish bagel shop in the middle of Pikesville, which was one time predominantly all Jewish.
Mhm.
Majority of our customers are Jewish. We have great conversations. We will have one with our first guest, of course, but there's a lot more similarities than people really think or people want to
Right.
admit. So we're
Right.
hoping we can touch upon that today and also discuss a little bit about what Jewish Baltimore was like back in the
Yes.
day.
Yes. And interested to get our guest perspective.
Mhm,
Perspectives. We have two guests that we're very honored to have with us this evening. So
mhm,
currently, I live in walking distance of Sinai Hospital, which
mhm.
the Jewish connection there. I live near the Park Heights neighborhood, which is very rich in Jewish culture.
Yep.
And at one point, right, my understanding was that like the Park Heights community was the second largest Jewish community in the country outside of New York.
New York.
And I'm not sure if that's really the case, but we can check with our guests. You can always Google stuff. But one thing we like about Real Talk, we like to actually engage with people and learn from people's lived experience.
We
Get
sh-
off the
yes.
Googler every now and then and actually talk to some people, right? So
Yes.
yeah, very much looking forward to our discussion. And also, I've read Not in My Neighborhood, book that really talks quite a bit about race and cultural relations between whites, Jews, and
Mhm,
blacks in Baltimore. So always been a topic of interest and always looking to learn more. So looking
mhm.
forward to talking to our guests.
Yep. And what better, me being a historian, what better way to learn about history than from the people who lived it?
I agree.
So I
I
think it's
agree.
always a great, it's a primary source,
Yes.
educated people. So we're going to use our primary sources today. So without further ado, let's introduce our first guest. Her name is Maxine Seidman, but she goes by Max. We all call her Max. I will never call her Maxine. So she is a Baltimore native, a dear friend of ours. Again, like we said, she's a regular at the shop, her and her family. She's actually born in 1937. I love it when people give us their age and when they were born. Own it. That's amazing. She lived in Baltimore County, but she said she's been to city. She went to city schools. Proud of that. She attended Towson University Teachers College. She taught kindergarten in the city for about 8 years, and then she taught at the Jewish Community Center, or as people know it as the JCC. She taught preschool. And then in 1983, she founded Play Centers, what is now called Play Keepers, with a partner. She has 4 children who have all attended BCPS, and she has 6 grand women, as she calls them. So without further ado, we are bringing on our friend Max. Hello, Max.
Hello there, Abir. Hello, Doug.
Hi, Max. Welcome. Welcome.
How
Thank
are
you.
you?
I'm very well.
Good. Welcome. Welcome. We're excited to have you on the show.
Thank you. I think I'm excited to be here. Not sure.
We'll check back at the end to make sure that you still
Okay.
feel that way. That's part of our Part of
Yes.
one of our goals.
Yes. I don't think we've ever had an unsatisfied customer, as we call them.
Okay.
So we'll see. So we're going to jump right in.
Yep.
All right.
So Max, talk about what's your family's migration story? How did you end up in the place that you are in now?
And actually, not much of a migration. My mother was born in Baltimore.
Oh, okay.
When people came to Baltimore, though, they lived downtown on Baltimore Street.
Mm.
Very big Jewish community. There is, first of all, on Lombard Street, if you're familiar with, there were lots of Jewish delis.
Yes.
There is, and he's no longer there, but for a very long time, and until I don't know how many years ago, there was a chicken man, and he sold kosher chickens. They were live. He killed them. He koshered them, and that's where Jewish people got their chickens. Lloyd Street Synagogue is off of Lombard Street. It was obviously a very large Jewish neighborhood. The Jewish Museum is now housed either in or next door to the Lloyd Street Synagogue, which is very much in use today. So that's where we started. So my mother remembered many times being on Baltimore Street, and they would take the streetcar and come uptown. My father came from Siberia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He was 7. He was the oldest of 3 boys. And he came literally on a slow boat through China. Took them forever. Wow. He came here. They went to Syracuse, but then he came back to Baltimore. And so I think he felt like a true Baltimorean. He didn't have a lot of stories left from Siberia. An uncle of mine did write a tale about it, but we don't have much history. Just that he loved the cold and the snow. So maybe he did remember that.
So Siberia. So of course, if those who may not know where Siberia is, if you don't, you probably live in Iraq, Russia, right?
Right.
So what brought him to the States?
I think there were pogroms. He was born in, I want to say 1897.
Can you explain to the audience what a pogrom is? I'm sorry, there may be people who don't know the history.
Pogroms were actions against Jewish people in many, and it lasted for many, many years. If anyone has seen Fiddler on the Roof, the actions that happened against the Jewish people in the village were called pogroms, where I don't know if they were all soldiers or villagers, just came after these people only because they were Jewish. And it was pretty horrific. And that really, the pogroms and the actions of the people involved in pogroms, I think, sent many people to America.
Wow. So basically, he was fleeing persecution.
Right.
Got it. I see. Freedom. Yep. Which I think is a common theme for a lot of people when they do want to come to the United States. So he comes here, he settles. Your mom, you said, was born in Baltimore.
Yes.
She comes from a Jewish family as well.
Yes.
Correct.
My grandparents were from Russia, I think, also.
Okay.
But, I never knew my grandfather. A very Jewish thing, and it's a cultural thing, you name children after someone who has died in the family. My grandfather died 3 months before I was born. His name was Max Harry. I am Maxine Harriet. So it was very easy.
I love that. That's so cool. Yeah. I think
Very
we have
neat.
something similar in our culture where you will name after somebody who's passed or in honor of an elder, but you never name for example, we don't do juniors. Like my brother wanted to name his son after him. My mom freaked out. No, you don't do that. It's like superstition. So that's very cool.
A lot of it is superstition.
Yes. Yeah. So you were named after your grandfather. Very, very cool. So tell us, Maxine, what made Jewish Baltimore unique?
When I was a kid, everybody, they lived either on Park Heights Avenue, Doug, or in Forest Park.
Okay. Yep.
And they all came up from Baltimore Street. They started moving north, and many ended up in Forest Park, which was had a large Jewish population. And Park Heights, as you said, and all along Park Heights Avenue. If you're familiar with Mondawmin.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it started around there, Reisterstown Road and Park Heights Avenue, and came up to Belvedere Avenue, which is where the Pimlico racetrack is.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
And then people started moving upward, farther north along Park Heights, and more suburban. I think the Park Heights and Belvedere was the city. And not that these places were not the city, but it was more suburban than urban, I think.
Right.
Okay.
Homes with larger grounds around them and trees, and although there were trees on Park Heights Avenue.
So what made it unique, though? What made it different than, say, Black neighborhoods or?
Baltimore is, and probably still is, although it has certainly, we've expanded. We had Greektown, Little Italy. Well, they didn't call it Jewtown, but that's where all the Jews lived, was Forest Park and Park Heights. So we were a very ethnic community. Our communities were separated by ethnicity, and Judaism then was considered an ethnic group of people.
Right. It still kind of is, like, when people
Yeah.
identify,
Yes.
they do identify as Jewish, as opposed to saying, like, I'm a Russian Jew or something like that. I think that comes first. So, so was it also unique to the fact that, sorry, somebody's trying to call me, with the way people practiced religion or the shops or anything like that made it unique also? Like, you entered that area, you knew you were in Jewish Baltimore?
Well, when I can think of a grocery store that was on Park Heights Avenue, Pimlico. It was owned by Jewish people, and everybody went there. And I guess they had a lot of Jewish food. In Forest Park, there were a couple of delis that were very popular.
Okay.
This was Jewish Baltimore at that time. I'm talking, I guess, 40s, 50s. Maybe 60s.
Okay. Yeah, I think a deli is like the quintessential, like,
yes, absolutely,
like the cornerstone of a Jewish neighborhood.
Jewish community. Yeah.
Yes,
that Jewish deli. Yep. So
lox and bagels, which are now ubiquitous, but then it was
right. And I love lox and bagels when they're made right.
absolutely. I love the shop. Yeah.
I love it. So, Maxine, besides Jewish Baltimore being unique, can you tell us about a best memory you had growing up in Baltimore?
Now, I've talked to my sister about this. Your questions were very thought-provoking. We had an idyllic life. We really did. I don't know. I remember roller skating on Falls Road. I remember riding my bike. I remember, riding the bus to school. We went to an elementary school, Mount Washington, which is still this fabulous elementary school. There were 2 Jewish kids in my class. So the neighborhood has certainly changed. It's a very diverse community now. I went to what was then junior high school, across from the Meyerhoff, now owned by Med Chi, but it was actually the Robert E. Lee. Wow, they probably changed that real fast.
Right.
And then I went to Forest Park High School.
Okay.
I have to tell you that it was probably 90% Jewish. I went to my kids' high school graduations at Pikesville. All the parents who were there all went to Forest Park.
Forest Park.
Wow.
Very interesting. It was sort of interesting. So it was a happy life. I don't have any one particular memory. I just feel like it was a very happy life, and probably not every minute of every day.
Right.
But my memories are very fond, pleasant memories.
That's always good to know.
Right. And Max, what you mentioned about the high school graduation. So like you said, that followed that migration path that you talked about, right?
Right.
So you see, like you said, from Forest Park, well, like you said, what I consider downtown area, like you said, Baltimore Street, Lombard, then you move out to Forest Park, and then, like you said, keep going out, and because, like I said, more suburban.
Right.
Of course, eventually Park Heights, it's like a Beers question about, it becomes the county after a while, right? After you follow.
Farther out. Yes, it does.
Yeah. So Max, what's your perspective on race relations during your upbringing in Baltimore?
Doug, my parents had a grocery store, And many people might know it was Falls Road near Lake Avenue. It is now Ye Old Vine Store.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my parents' grocery store where I spent the first 19 years of my life. It was all white and Christian, except for us.
Okay.
Up the street, if you're familiar with Princeton Sports.
Absolutely.
Okay, there are two little streets that come out onto Falls Road, and that's where our Black customers lived. And nobody ever thought anything. You know, we didn't have that much involvement with people who were Black. These were customers. My father was always very friendly with them. They were friendly with us. I knew they were Black, but I don't think, and I'm trying to not be Pollyanna and trying to remember, I do not remember any kind of unpleasant instances with these people.
Or in the neighborhood in general?
Yeah, in general. You know, I remember my brother, who is deceased now. He died about 20 years ago. And he was a kid. He was older than I. When he was a kid, he'd come in and say they were fighting with me because they said I killed Christ.
Oh, my goodness.
He said, I told them I didn't do it, but they were still hollering at me. But, you know, they didn't bother me with that, but he was, you know, I guess a big boy. And,
which is a common slur that people use.
Right. Trying to put that on.
Right.
But my only interaction with people who were Black, I graduated high school in 1954. 1954 was when segregation ended.
Right.
And I went to Towson. And the person in front of me, I forget her first name, but her last name was Hall. And my last name was Hart, H-A-R-T. She was the first Black person I'd ever gone to school with.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was a very different time.
Right.
Very, very different time.
And also, I think being child of immigrants, and usually people live in their own communities and are very secluded. So they live in that insular type of environment until you go off and you become an adult, and then you experience other things in your life.
Well, especially because Baltimore was like Baltimore was. You know, we were in our insular spaces and comfortable.
Right.
We didn't know anything different.
Right. Like a lot of major cities.
Right. And then, you know, as Max pointed out, at that time you had legal segregation, right? So, you know, we talk about now people still tend to be around their own, if you will, or how, you know, whoever they identify with. And then, you know, at a time where people, you know, you could argue that people do that naturally. And then if you have like legally imposed segregation on top of that, you know, you get a situation like you talked about, Max, right? Once you get to the university level, it might be the first time that you actually,
It was. I mean, I knew these Black people up the road, and I was certainly friendly with them and, you know, knew them well. But I had never gone to school. Graduated, as I said, high school in 1954, and there was nobody in any of my classes.
Right.
When I got to Towson, and Miss Hall was in front of me.
Right. Which I think, unfortunately, could be something that's not unique just to you.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
No,
Especially for there.
that's how everybody grew up. I mean, anybody who graduated high school in 54, anytime before that, you had never gone to school with anybody except a white person.
Right. So we do have a comment, a question actually from one of our viewers, Vernon. Hello, Vernon. Thanks for joining us. He says, could you tell us about the presence of so-called Jews of color in Baltimore and its role in the overall Jewish community in Baltimore, Maryland in the past and now? If you're able to speak on that.
I can speak on today. I do not remember knowing any Jew of color. I do not remember any at all, and I could have forgotten.
Right.
But certainly today, as Ben and I were speaking, my granddaughters went to Krieger Schechter Day School, and there were some children of color who were in the school. There had been a family prior to had come from Africa, also you know, of color, and were Jewish. It was interesting because the child had gone to a school in Randallstown. I don't remember the name of the school. And the mom said, now there are certain things that he can't eat. and she listed anything with pork and any things that would not be considered kosher. And I don't know if it was the teacher or the counselor picked up on that and thought, here's this family from Africa. What are they saying? And this person reached out to the family and found out they were Jewish. And called Krieger Schechter, and the kids did attend Krieger Schechter for a while. So, yeah, and there periodically I see people of color in the synagogue who are participating. Actually, we had a child in our program at Summit Park who was, mom was a single mom, Black woman, and at some point, maybe somebody told me that maybe the child's father was Jewish. Well, the mom started attending Kiza congregation, which is the synagogue I attend, and the child started attending. And then one day she got up on the bima, which is the altar, and spoke to the congregation and spoke as, "Whither thou goest, I will go," from Naomi and Ruth, and she converted to Judaism. So she had not been born Jewish, but she converted, and the child converted, and they were members of the synagogue. They moved away for a while. She has come back, and I have seen her in synagogue since.
That's great.
Returned. Yeah, so it was a beautiful story.
Thank you. So Max, next question. Let's say you could master time travel, right? So you have the ability to, you figured that one out for all of humanity. If you could go back in time, what would you like to change and why?
I can't think of anything, and I will tell you something I wrote to in my bio. My parents had this grocery store. Every day when I walked in from school, both of my parents were there. Mom and Dad greeted me every afternoon. Now, I think that gave us such a sense of security because, we were always enveloped, and it wasn't not a very showy kind of love, but there was a warmth and a feeling of comfort and a feeling of security. So, and it enabled me, I think, to travel through the years to the different situations that we are living now. And I wonder about other people who may have had difficulty, and could they have used a feeling of security so that they could have gone through these changing times a lot more easily. And I don't know that. This was my experience. And I think, my sister and I have been always able to. She was a teacher in Baltimore County schools for a long time. So I think we had an easy sort of life. And I don't know about other people. Was it difficult for them being introduced to Black people, being introduced to people of other religions? I can't speak to that. I think we were shielded from a lot. And that probably wasn't great. I never went to a funeral until I went to my father's funeral when I was 21 years old. The word cancer was never spoken out loud. It was always whispered. So we were shielded from a lot, only because they wanted us to be safe. But, it was not reality.
Right.
So Max, how old were you? You said when you went to your father's funeral?
21.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And usually death really shapes people's lives. I know it shaped my life, with the passing of my uncle and all.
Right. The first, my grandmother died. My father died in January. My grandmother died in December. So the first two funerals were my father and grandmother. And I was 21 years old.
Wow. So thank you for sharing your experiences with us.
That is very insightful. Yeah.
Yes. So we are thinking, if you had the choice of somebody singing your album, which artist would you have to perform an album about your life and why, since you shared all of this, history?
Well, I'm not certain. You've given me all this stuff to think about. Oh, my goodness.
Well, there's a second part to this question, besides the and why.
This is the holiday of Sukkot, and traditionally many people have this little hut outside. And if you drive through any of the neighborhoods where a lot of Jewish people live, you will see these little things outside. They're canvas, and I have one in my backyard where I've Had it for about 45 years. I've had several, but I need a new one. It's all ripped. I'm really upset. But I've been very busy inviting people. So in the middle, I've been trying to think about this. But Helen Reddy, just dying, made me think I am woman. And I love that. So, I don't know if my kids would think that's really crazy. But
so would that be the title of your album, or?
Yeah, I Am Woman.
I Am Woman.
I love it. I love
Very
it.
good.
So
And that's fine, Max. It's your album, right? So your kids, they'll have to fall in line, right? It's Max's album.
yes.
They're 51 to 61, so I don't think they're going to care to listen to what I have to say.
Well, thanks, Max, for being on our show. I always appreciate you talking to you. I'm sure I'll bump into you.
Yes.
At the bagel shop.
Yes.
And we appreciate you sharing your experiences and your stories with us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for making it a reasonably easy, comfortable.
Told you it wasn't that bad.
There we go. Right, we made our goal. Max, we appreciate you, and thank you for your time and sharing your story. Nice meeting you too. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Good night.
Yep. Take care.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go. So we have part one of Jewish Baltimore. And then, so now we're moving on to, so when you speak of, I think, the Jewish community, I think people can't neglect the fact that the Jewish community has been an integral part of the civil rights movement as well.
Yeah.
So what we would like to talk about now is we're going to bring our next guest on. And
yes, we will. And yes, he has been. So, but I do want to just appreciate again, Max, because I really enjoyed reading the book, Not in My Neighborhood. And, just the migration through the city towards the county that Max talked about and she knew about firsthand was just very, she just rolled it out. And it's just like, of course, the book goes through that and other aspects of race and culture and politics and civil rights. But it was interesting to hear, Max talk firsthand how she was familiar with that migration through the city as well. So, now our next guest is Ben, as we said. And Ben is the Jewish scholar at the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies in Baltimore. He's an experienced professor, university administrator, scholar, award-winning teacher, public speaker, and practitioner, and facilitator of interreligious dialogue. Before arriving at the ICJS, Ben was director of the Malcolm and Diane Rosenberg Program in Judaic Studies and the founding faculty principal at the West Ambler Johnston Residential College at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. Ben holds degrees from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, a bachelor's in social thought and political economy, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, a master's in Jewish thought, and the University of Chicago with a PhD in history of Judaism. Ben has been published on a wide variety of topics, including Jewish philosophy, philosophy of language, literary theory, aesthetics, the politics of translation, German Jewish history and culture, Holocaust theology, Jewish-Christian relations, and interreligious dialogue. Ben's most recent research project, a book entitled The Life of Quotation in Modern Jewish Thought, will be published next year, so keep an eye out for that. Ben, his wife Jenny, and their 2 teenage children live in a small neighborhood called Arcadia in Northeast Baltimore. They are members of Congregation Beth Am in Reservoir Hill, and Ben volunteers with Civic Works, the Elijah Cummings Youth Program, and with Jews United for Justice, or JUFJ, where he serves as a district captain for District 45 and for Baltimore's 3rd District. So we are very happy to have Ben with us here. As you can see, he is a very busy person. I'm glad we were able to catch up with him. Welcome, Ben.
Hello, Ben.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. That's a very impressive resume. And just let the audience know that was condensed.
Yes.
So I don't think Ben sleeps at all. He just, is on the go all the time. So thank you for being here with us as well.
Well, I'm no longer on the go all the time now.
That is true. That is true.
I'm on the Zoom all the time.
Right. Like many of us.
I appreciate the laughter.
So we're going to start off with the same question we started off with Max, is what is your family's migration story?
So I love that you want to start off with the family's migration story, because that's a very Jewish question. In interreligious dialogue, we tend to have to acquiesce to other people's questions. What do you believe, etc. Asking me about my family's migration story is an integral part of who I am in the U.S. So much so that they even have programs at my kids' Jewish day school where you focus on that journey. So I'm really grateful for the question. I just want to give a little bit of background so that my story makes a little more sense. My family had Holocaust survivors in it. It had veterans of World War II. And I lived in that tension of escaping Nazi Germany and also fighting Nazi Germany together. And so there was a lot of anxiety about who I am, where I'm going. And it was fraught with this fear of anti-Semitism and of violence, but also a really strong defensive posture that we're not going to sit down anymore. We're going to fight back. We're in this, in Yiddish, we call it the Goldene Medina, the golden land of the U.S. where we can be free. So we're going to do so. So I have 4 grandparents that have 4 very different ways into the U.S. And so I just want to focus on one to show where some of my own anxieties come from. My grandfather, my Zeta, his father was a strong man in the circus in Eastern Europe.
Interesting.
The joke was that I was the mailman's kid, but
we're not touching that one, Ben.
It's okay. I can live with this nebbishy existence. But he was the strong man in a circus in Eastern Europe, and we don't really know quite where. Borders of towns and countries are constantly changing, and so the story changes. So we'll just say Eastern Europe. And he caught somebody trying to rape my great grandmother and killed him with his bare hands, strangled him to death. And so they had to leave in a hurry. And so the family, some of the family ended up in the U.S. and in other places. And there's some really interesting stories about how people reconnected over time. But my grandfather came to Philadelphia with some of his siblings as a result of this murder. And so when Max was talking about pogroms, there was anti-Semitism and people were escaping it. My story starts with murder, which kind of interesting. Especially at a Jewish day school where my daughter is trying to tell this story while everyone else has these dramatic escapes from all these European countries. And my daughter, the great granddaughter, is saying, "Well, yeah, my great great grandfather killed someone and had to leave pretty quick."
Right.
Wow. You told me that you were going to tell me an interesting story, and that was an interesting story.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing that one.
So we're done?
Oh. Yeah, we're done. We can leave. Bye, Ben. You're not going to get off that easy.
No, we're just getting started.
Yeah, we're just getting started. So now we're going to get into what you actually do when we talk about Jews and politics. But go ahead, Doug.
Yes. So Ben, can you explain the integration of religious value in your political activity?
Sure. And if you want to interrupt me, if I say something that's unclear or provocative, you should feel free to do that.
Sure.
We'll just keep this as an open dialogue. I'm going to use the word political in its classical sense, not in a partisan sense as like Democrat or Republican, but like in the messy affairs of the city. So I think that all relationships, all interaction, all language is political. There's simply no way to escape the politics of everyday life. I think embedded in like American English, for instance, is patriarchy, is racism, all of the things that make up these power dynamics that we didn't choose to have, but somehow make up our everyday life. And so we lean into those dynamics, every relationship we have. So accepting that all of these relationships are political, I think it's also important to know that there is a religious component to that as well. And so when I think of my own religious values and political activity, I tend not to divorce my religious life from my political life. That's a quintessentially American thing to do, to say, put religion over here,
Right.
politics over here. But the problem,
like separation of church and state, right, Ben? That's what we were always taught, right?
right? And
Yeah.
believe me, I actually do very much appreciate the separation in a lot of spheres. Speaking as a religious minority, and having experiences in Appalachia and Blacksburg, Virginia, being a religious minority, I am very grateful for the separation of church and state. But when I talk about politics in everyday life, it's hard for me to divorce my my own Jewish values in the work that I do, in the life that I'm living. Now, if people want to use their religious values to engage in partisan activity, advocacy, I actually support that. But the problem is, if you put it out in the political sphere, you have to understand that it can be interrogated and analyzed, because if it has to do with all of us living in the polis, it becomes an issue of policy. And if it's your religious conviction, you have to be open to the fact that we might take issue with it. But I'm comfortable enough with some parts of my own religious convictions that I'm content to interrogate them in the public realm. And if needed, I amend them, because I learn a great deal from a lot of my non-Jewish peers about how best to do politics. So that's a more abstract explanation of the integration of my religious value and political activity. A more practical element is that I volunteer with Jews United for Justice, where we advocate on progressive issues in Baltimore City and the state of Maryland, and we try to educate our legislators on how we are coming to our decisions and priorities based on our Jewish identity, but also why these progressive policies matter for everyday Marylanders and Baltimoreans.
So would that be where you would want to plug in your program that you're doing, talking about, your the Jewish Organization for Justice?
Oh, Jews United for Justice?
Jews United for Justice.
So you mentioned it. Yeah, you want to talk a little bit more about that, Ben?
Well, so I volunteer for them. It's I think it's a wonderful organization and has incredible leadership, and they have been instrumental in a number of really important policy decisions in Maryland. And right now, JUFJ is advocating for the right to consent for renters in renters court, because I don't think a lot of people think about the incredible damage that's being done in our court system against people who are being evicted from their home.
Correct.
And so we're advocating for the right for them to have representation. 96% of landlords are represented in court. Less than 1% of tenants are represented in court. And so that needs to change. Secondly is local control for the Baltimore Police Department. A lot of people have very strong opinions on what we should be doing about the police department in relationship to residents in Baltimore City. One of the first things that we would like to do, and a number of other organizations and residents of Baltimore City, is to make Baltimore City's police department Baltimore-based. Baltimore's police department is one of only 2 police departments in the whole country that is run by the state of Maryland. It's a state organization, not a city one.
I didn't know that.
Didn't know that either.
So for instance, if you have a grievance against a police officer, you have to go to Annapolis.
Wow.
And police officers already have a lot of immunity in their relationship with everyday people in Baltimore.
Right.
And so when we try to create better relationships between the community and police officers, it would be critical that the elected representation of Baltimore City have a say in what the police department's actually doing. And this was a recommendation of the Department of Justice's 2016 consent decree on Baltimore City's policing.
So I think that is a great segue for our next question, because what you spoke about is civic action. Going in and you're taking whatever is happening in your community and trying to create a cause. Does Judaism encourage civic action? Is that where you pull your, civic mindedness from? Or is it a combination of, being an American and also being Jewish?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to fully discern where all of my influences are coming from. I certainly see elements of Judaism inspiring me to certain action, but then I also see certain actions that I reinterpret back into Judaism. It's sort of a dialogical relationship. It makes for, I think, a pretty healthy relationship with tradition. But I'm also, my background is mostly in philosophy in terms of what I've been reading for the last 20 years. And so political philosophers, historians of political philosophy have influenced me. But honestly, it's a drive for equity and equality in just a basic civic sphere. I've become more and more aware of my surroundings in a way that I probably wasn't as a child or a teenager, and that every action that I'm doing has some sort of political ramification, short and long term. So if I'm not doing the right thing at this moment, then it's a missed opportunity. In the Jewish mystical tradition, can talk about this a little bit, but there's an urgency for civic action right now, yesterday, tomorrow, because the world is unjust, and we know that because injustices are just a very daily part of everyday life. And so I have a religious conviction to act. I have a political conviction to act. And then I think I also just have an existential, I didn't choose to be a middle-aged white Jewish guy. In fact, I don't know if anybody ever has. But
that's a topic for a different show with a unique audience then.
but I am afforded certain privileges and powers in a particular society that if I don't come to terms with them, think about them, learn from them, and work with all of my neighbors to create a more equitable environment in which everyone has access to power. It's not one over the other, that there's some sort of power sharing and that we're learning. Like true equality.
Right.
And it's something that's unimaginable because we've never seen it. But I continue to want to work toward it. It's part of the messianic tradition of Judaism to constantly trying to repair the world.
Right. There's a comment from Vernon about, I didn't know that about, being a city resident. So Ben, I appreciate you sharing that. And also a couple of things you said resonated with me. You talk about, it kind of reminds me of like this ripple effect, when you throw a pebble in the lake. You talk about, the actions that you take now and those effects that'll have long term. And then also that sense of urgency, which I really appreciate. Because I guess for folks I know who are civic minded like you, or who are, seeking justice, seeking to be a part of getting justice for multiple people, if you will, it is that sense of urgency. Like you said, I can't wait. But then I've heard people, be frustrated, like you said, like, is this ever going to change? Is the situation ever going to improve? But like you said, every action you take, it does have an effect. And I really, I'm sitting here reflecting, as you're sharing this. So you really give me something to kind of chew on as you say that too. I really, really appreciate that kind of a gem you dropped on me, so to speak. So thank you for that.
I like the metaphor too, the ripple. I think that's a lovely way of illustrating.
Unfortunately, not everybody thinks that way, but we're hoping people like that will, rise up and make it that mantra. It's a ripple effect.
Right. Yes. All right, I'm still reflecting. It's my okay, all right. So Ben, you see why I do this, right? I get to go into deep thought from the various guests. But can you talk some more about your role with the ICJS?
Sure. So I'm the Jewish scholar at the ICJS, the Institute for Islamic Christian Jewish Studies in Baltimore City. And what that means is that I engage in scholarship. I have my sort of my writing and my professional duties to the academy, conferences, papers, things like that. But I also do a lot of teaching at the Institute. I help in the programming of our fellowships and our public programming. I do community building. So it's meaning trying to bring people together And what makes us unique is that we try to bring people together to study. There are a lot of people who have their initial relationships painting houses together, engaging in the works of social justice or church events. There are all sorts of ways in which people meet and get to know one another.
Right.
We get to know one another through studying different religious sources and reflecting on the meaning of interreligious difference. Like, what does it mean to say that you're part of a religious tradition? And what does it mean to say that there's difference? Is it just difference of opinion? Is it just difference of worldview? Were there irreconcilable differences and that we should shake hands and depart? Part of the work at the ICJS is actually creating a space in which interreligious conversations can become a meaningful endeavor for religious and non-religious people alike. So it's an incredible space because there are certain things that you can say within your religious community, and then there are certain things that you probably can't say.
Right.
But in an interreligious context, you feel very comfortable saying them because the people who have the disposition to dialogue are willing to listen.
Right.
And
Good point.
If you want to engage in dialogue, what you're saying to your partner is, I'm not going to debate you. I want to learn about who you are, what makes you tick. I'm going to ask you clarifying questions. And ultimately, I'm being open to the idea that I will be transformed by our relationship in any which way, right? I don't have to be convinced of all of your ideas or arguments, but there's something transformational that may take place in this encounter that I'm open to. And that's to be in an environment with a lot of people that share that disposition, in different ways and different levels, is inspiring. And so that's part of my work, is to facilitate those conversations. Also, we do programs for teachers. So we almost got a beer to do a program with us. But a beer. Now I know why she couldn't do it, because she's doing a show.
That was prior to this as well, but I had a lot of other commitments. Yes,
it's good. So we have a teachers program. We work with congregations, and then we have a justice leaders program where we work with people who do work of justice in Baltimore City, and we take them out of their environment of doing and give them an opportunity to reflect on the meaning of their work for them and for others. It's very powerful for people to realize that, for instance, Muslim theology could actually lead someone to fight for police reform. It doesn't sound that crazy.
Right.
And most people accept that that's the case, but to hear somebody who's passionate about it and is articulating it in such a way that it's so compelling that you have a little bit of holy envy, in the sense that you're like, I wish I had that in my religion. It's not my term. It's not my term. It belongs to someone else. I'm just borrowing.
That's a good one, though. Yeah.
So is that similar to that program that I have up right here, the Imagine Justice program?
Yeah. So the Imagining Justice in Baltimore program is a program where we study with justice fellows, and this year's theme was water justice in Baltimore. So water justice is really one of the most salient and critical forms of justice in the American public. And in Baltimore City, it's an incredible crisis, not just because of our crumbling infrastructure, but because 1/3 of our residents live under the UN standard poverty line in regard to how much they pay for water in relation to their income. So they're paying too much for water. And water is a resource in our religious traditions that really shouldn't be owned by people. And just to give you a little glimpse of the type of work we do, in the segment that I teach in this program, which you can sign up for, by the way, and I will talk about that in a minute. If you read the Hebrew Bible, whether you want to read it in Hebrew or an English translation, I think it's the same. God doesn't actually create water in the beginning. Water is there with God. So there's something about this sacred quality of water, this primordial power of water, that belongs with God, and that we don't have a right to deny any person. That is actually an affront against this ineffable being that people want to pray to and think about. One of the greatest sins against God would be to deny someone water. So in Baltimore City, we have a crisis, and it's of a religious order, because we are denying people a basic human right and a basic religious right. So we talked about the differences in our religious traditions on how we broach this issue. The fellows then had conversations over the course of 6 months about these issues, and talked about their own work and talked about their own religious lives. And then this is the interesting thing, because of COVID, we had to change everything. So we did 4 videos that we're sharing with the public. If you register, you have access to the videos, and each week you have a discussion about the video. The videos are only about 25 minutes. And then you have a conversation about water justice in religious traditions, and our justice fellows will facilitate that conversation. And so it's a way for people to get to know one another across differences in Baltimore City. Because of Zoom, you really can get a wide variety of people participating in breakout rooms. And of course, it's not the real thing.
Right.
It's the best that we can do. But I really encourage your viewers to sign up for this event. It's free. It's a nice way to spend the time, and you're going to meet some incredible people. And people practice dialogue differently, and it's just a good way to think about what works for you.
And Ben, they can sign up through the link that's right there on the screen now. If they go to that link.
I'm gonna say yes.
Okay.
It did have a register here little thing when I checked it, so yes.
If it doesn't work, just go to icjs.org and you will be able to sign up there and learn a lot more about our organization. We have a great website. Really, I have wonderful colleagues. You can learn all about them on our website.
Okay.
So you speak a lot about ICJS, and that is about interfaith and dialogue and how important it is. But some people believe or think interfaith dialogue doesn't work. There's no sense of people coming together and talking about their differences, or if they have similarities, because it really doesn't do much. So convince us otherwise, or convince audience members otherwise, why interfaith dialogue is so important.
So I'm going to sound a little bit rabbinic here.
Okay, go for it.
So does not work. I need a work for what? Like, what is?
Let's say it doesn't resolve some religious
conflict.
Let's say conflict, yes.
Okay.
Or even social conflict, regardless of religion. You may be having dialogue with a person who is atheist. So why are we discussing, things with people of other faiths and backgrounds?
So I think, I'll say that it works, but then I'll explain why I think it works.
Okay.
Dialogue is not going to resolve all of our conflicts, because not everybody's interested in dialogue. There's a fundamental debate, or there's a fundamental difference between debate and dialogue. Debate has a very important role in our civic society, in that I have to convince you of an idea so that becomes policy and show that I'm right. That's a different way in which you encounter a human being. You're not listening. What you're doing is trying to look for weaknesses in the conversation. You're thinking ahead. You're not living in the moment of the human. Dialogue is this idea that you learn from other people and you think along with them. So I hear, is that the call to prayer in the background?
Yep. You have good ears.
I've got good headphones.
There you go.
So if you are interested in dialogue, you are actually giving up certain truths that you hold dear in a particular space. And I'll give you some profound examples of this. So you're Palestinian, I'm Jewish. Like you said, we're probably not supposed to like each other. We just happen to like each other. And we probably have a lot of, well, actually, I don't want to presume anything, but I think we probably have similar political proclivities, although I don't know that for sure. But we can agree that that's a conversation that people have a terrible time with. They just simply can't do it. You talk about the conflict, and and people immediately become grenades.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about that topic that is untouchable because there are heresies. And when I say heresies, what I mean to say is that when somebody says a heresy, you will interpret everything that they have done in their past and everything that they will do in their future based on that heresy.
Mm-hmm.
And the topic of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict functions like a heresy. You either have the right opinion or the wrong opinion, but then I will interpret all aspects of your life through that lens.
Interesting.
And that's devastating. And that's why I have no intention of talking about my own politics on a TV show, because it will extend out of my control.
Right.
But what a dialogue does is that you don't have to start there. It is by far the elephant in the room. There's no question. But what you want to do is you want to listen to that person's sensibilities, listen to that person, how that person has come to her, his opinions and experiences. And this is the critical part about dialogue that you don't see in debate. I value your experiences. I value your collective memory. I value your social situations. I value everything that makes you who you are. And so that's going to make it hard for me to fully disagree, even though in my heart I might. And it's a disposition. It's not going to resolve conflict, at least in that situation. But it's also, again, like that ripple effect that you talked about, throwing a stone on the lake. It's simply just throwing the first stone.
Right.
You have to be courageous in at least going into a space that you're going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I can't promise in dialogue that you'll be comfortable, especially talking about those issues. But if you're true to it and you listen to it, at some point you're going to either come to a decision that this is worthwhile in my life,
right,
or it's not. But I think it's important to throw those first stones, because our leadership doesn't do it. Our society sort of takes these political issues like a football game, or I'm just thinking of football right now, but any type of sporting event where it becomes this Manichaean worldview where one side is good and one side is bad.
Right. Competition too.
Competition. But the best way to resolve conflict is to know the people involved in the conflict. You know, I'll just briefly say this. Those people in my own religious community who disagree with me on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict have a hard time telling me anything about Palestinian culture other than they know about Hamas and Yasser Arafat.
All the tropes of the stereotypes.
You know, and when they start loving their kids more than they hate us, all of this. And so I said, can you tell me the name of a Palestinian poet? Can you tell me the name of a Palestinian writer, songwriter, something about Palestinian culture, Palestinian cuisine? What is it that makes a Palestinian outside of the things that you're thinking about in terms of politics? And that's a hard question to answer for most people. In fact, I've never had a compelling answer. Say, well, actually, and that gives people pause.
But is it because they don't? Is it really because they don't know, or is it they really don't want to know? Sometimes, yeah, because we can say the same thing about, say, Palestinians. Well, what do you know about, Jewish faith? And sometimes the scales are tipped uneven, where one group of people know a little bit more about others because of the political dynamics. But sometimes I think it really gets to the fact that people just want to believe what they want to believe in order for them to hold on to their political or religious beliefs as well. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense.
Right.
And that's one of the challenges, whether or not people choose to be ignorant. But I think what happens when you engage in relationship, you go through this process. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to pretend that I understand how this works. Right. But I do have some experience in dialogue, and that, there's usually this defensive posture that the person I'm encountering is an exception.
Interesting. Okay.
Right.
And then there has to be some continuation. Well, actually, no, they're not an exception. And and I've been on both sides of that, right? I've been like the first Jew someone has ever met. And when they happen to like me and think that I'm affable and worth hanging out with, it's like the next thing is, well, you're probably not like other Jews. I'm like, let me tell you something.
Right.
Right.
You come to a family event. Good luck trying to figure me out compared to everyone else. So I do this work because I'm hopeful that it can change people, but I'm not naive enough to think that it will. Right. So
yeah, I mean, so again, I guess I'm gonna be taking this episode and replaying some things and reflecting, because Ben's giving me a lot. Because so Ben, as you're talking about your lived experience, I can't help but think about my lens as a Black man, and I know exactly. So I'm overlaying everything that I've lived of what you said, right? So someone trying to tell me that I'm an exceptional Black man because I don't fit their preconceived notion of how a Black man is supposed to show up.
Right.
But a couple of things I want to point out too that really resonate, and I'm glad you got to the point. You talked about the discomfort in actually having a dialogue with someone, right? And then Abir talked about is there a sense that someone doesn't want to be, they don't want to know. And my thing is, if you want to stay off to yourself, and Max kind of talked about this too, like if you're in a situation where your community, your neighborhood is not diverse, and you choose to keep it that way, right? And you never seek out anyone else. First of all, shame on you, right? But then you're going to sit there and stew in those, in that life, if you will. So Ben, what I hear you saying is you're part of, and you're creating space for these dialogues that you're being upfront will cause some discomfort. And hopefully, like Abir saying, you're going to open up your mind and learn something, and also admit what we don't know, right? So, like you said, if you're the first Jewish person I met, why not just leave it at that? Like, what I'm saying, like, see you as that individual. But we know in reality, right, all the stuff that you brought along, and like you said, you might not know anyone firsthand. You've never had any first-hand interaction. But sure enough, you have all these preconceived notions, stereotypes, and everything else, biases weighing down on you. So I agree. I think we cannot speak enough, I think, of the power of authentic dialogue. And Abir, you know this from a lot of work you and I do, right? About having we talk about these courageous conversations. We say about race, but there's courageous conversations about spirituality, about religious beliefs, about so many different topics. And I just think there is power in having those dialogues. And like you said, Ben, we know it's not the end all and be all, but it is amazing to me how many people won't even sit down and have the dialogue about, and you fill in the blank, right?
But Doug, I also want to add to that, even in these contexts, race is one of those things that people just cannot talk about.
Nope.
It's, we can talk about religious difference, but in this country, how do you talk about anything and not talk about race?
Correct.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
You agree.
What was the exception then? Is that what it is?
Preaching to the choir, right?
Right. And I'm grateful. I love this choir. But part of my work is helping people see in the American context, it's impossible to talk about dialogue and not talk about race.
Right.
Race is, people have called it the original sin of the U.S., but it makes up all aspects of our interpersonal relationships, whether we like it or not.
Absolutely.
I didn't want this to happen, like I said, but there's a religious philosopher named Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's famous in certain circles, but he was an incredible rabbi and a Holocaust survivor in a sense. He escaped the Holocaust, so he survived it. But he was an incredible mind, and he was so blown away by two things in America, or in the United States. One, he was blown away by Martin Luther King Jr. And two, he was blown away by how horrible this society is towards African Americans. And he felt a religious urgency that he couldn't actually. We just observed Yom Kippur a week ago. He felt that we couldn't actually ask God for forgiveness until we resolve the problems of, and this is even before the term was being used, but systemic racism. I I can't live to my highest moral potential when every single act that I'm doing is affecting my neighbors negatively, consciously or unconsciously.
Wow.
I need to change the system in such a way that both of us flourish simultaneously, so that I may even ask forgiveness for racism. Because you can ask God for forgiveness during Yom Kippur for sins against God. But you cannot ask God for forgiveness against sins of other people. But if racism, both practical and systemic, are part of our overall society, we're in no position to ask for forgiveness. And that's a terrifying thing theologically. And so if we can't talk about race, we're in many ways, in the Jewish tradition, blocking God from the world. And so we have and I actually believe this, a theological obligation to lean into that uncomfortable conversation about race, because we've never had it. If you go to Germany, everywhere you go, you see memorials to what the Nazis did.
Right.
Go to Fells Point. I mean, you have that little plaque about slavery, but we need to be reminded everywhere and at all times of what we're living in.
Right.
The memory of this, because it's actually, we're still feeling the echoes of it today. And there's a Jewish responsibility to change that. I say this, right? But we all know how our compatriots sort of recoil when talking about race, because they know in their heart they're not prejudiced. And they say, well, I don't believe myself to be prejudiced too, but if I'm not acting to change the conditions for racism, I might by necessity a racist. And I don't like that reality about myself.
Right.
But unless these conditions change, I don't have a choice. I didn't ask for this.
Right.
And so that's when we talk about race interreligiously, it's really one of the hardest things. And some people do it really well, and some people lean into that. But I think it's hard because we all want to imagine ourselves to be good people and loving each other and all of our differences. But the reality of the power structures of our country get in the way of that. So we have a lot of work.
Right. And I mean, I think it goes to the saying of if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, even if you don't think it, if you're not doing anything to change it, then, and just like in the Muslim tradition, they say, if you want to change something, you fight for it. If you can't fight for it, you change it with the pen. And if you can't change it with the pen, you change it with your heart. And that's the weakest of faith, because it's really not showing that change. But it's interesting. You talk about how, people have this stereotype of Jews. And here's a friend of mine, Lauren, who has a really interesting story. She said, I did a professional development on cultural awareness this afternoon for my school, and literally said the same thing regarding, what you said, Ben, about race and all. And she said about people being surprised I was Jewish and then saying, well, you don't really, quote, act Jewish, meaning my behavior was acceptable. And I'm like, okay, it's interesting that what is it that, people think, and she says about, being an anti-racist, going to that comment, but I find this baffling. Like, what is it that is,
it goes back to that Jewish power relationship.
Yeah.
So our language is American English, and in that language is a Protestant Christianity.
Correct.
And so a lot about our society is overtly and covertly Christian. I have to self-identify as a Jew using a Christian language, using Christian concepts. People ask me what I believe. Don't ask a Jewish person what they believe. I mean, one, they'll tell you, but two, it's a question that doesn't really interest us. It's not. I will say that we have a deep fear of idolatry, and if I tell you what I think about God at any one particular moment in time, and say that that's what I believe, I've created an idol and I've given it to you. And so I don't really want to do that.
Fascinating. Okay.
So it's there, but then I'm constantly having to interpret the broader majority's culture in order to have access to it. So when someone is telling me that I'm not behaving Jewishly, it's simply
I don't even know what that means or looks like. Okay.
you're saying you're not giving me enough in the way that I want to stereotype you,
Right.
other you. There's something about you that's compelling to me, and I don't want that to be the case. I need to keep you othered because otherwise it's going to get in the way of all the things that I currently hold sacred and true about my own identity.
Correct.
And my identity as opposed to your identity, rather than we're all trying to figure this out together. And it's amazing that we can have these interreligious friendships, but it's essentially saying I'm uncomfortable because I can't other you.
Right.
Yep. And that power dynamic, as a result of that you mentioned, Ben, right? Yeah, they can't put you in that box that they want to put you in.
Right.
So they can maintain that power position that they're in.
And I'd also add that, there are many ways to act Jewishly, right? Like like everything in the world, there isn't any one way. Anyone that says Muslims believe that, or Christians do that, or white Christians do this, and black Christians do that. I'm really obsessed with the election, like everyone else. And on my social media feed, it's like, well, what about the black vote? Like, are you assuming a homogeneous group of people? Like, what does that even mean? Right? And these
it's a monolith, all of them, yes.
And these are well-intended liberal people. And to Lauren's comment about looking Jewish, that also goes to the othering, right? I need to sort of, if I can't other you based on your behavior or how you speak or communicate, I'm going to other you in the way that you look. And amazingly, Jews look a whole lot like other people.
Well, also, they're very dynamic. They come from all over. Yeah, it's not like it's one.
As Max was talking about Jews from Africa, from Uganda and Ethiopia, Jews from India, Jews from Minnesota. I think there are a few Jews in Alaska. Like, and there are cultural differences between us.
Right.
So I lived in Israel for many years. And I had this tense identity with myself about who am I?
Right.
Because I was no longer part of a minority culture. But I was part of a majority culture, but I wasn't really part of that culture because I'm not Israeli. I can speak Hebrew and live day to day, but my religion and my politics are American through and through, right? And so who am I?
Right.
And I can tell you that a lot of people look very differently. That you can't. But it also happens in other contexts too. So at the ICJS, we often in the past have had not our constituents, but people who will come to an event and like say to a Muslim person, well, how come you're not covering yourself? Or how come you're doing X or Y? That's not Muslim, or that's not. And to have the audacity, indeed the temerity to tell a Muslim how she or he can act is an indication of where we're at as a society and culture.
Well, it also comes to the level of privilege that people have. And I love what Lauren just said, where she says, so I've been subject to anti-Semitic behaviors because people think they are safe to say it. So I don't think it's a concept that people are safe to say it. I think people just think they have the right to say it. They're empowered. Therefore, they're going to say it. Because I've had people tell me, I remember when I first started at a particular middle school, a dude came up to me. He's like, oh, I heard you're one of the good Muslims. What the hell does that mean? I have no idea what that means.
I'm not laughing.
Oh, I know. You're laughing at the fact that it's an idiotic comment. But what Lauren is saying is the fact that, people just think they can say what they want to say. And because, first of all, if anybody knows Lauren, she will kick your butt and body pump. Okay? That's what I know her as. She will kick your butt and body pump with a smile on it. That's Lauren to me, right? So, but
what is body pump?
It's weightlifting.
It sounds ominous.
Okay. Yeah, she definitely kicked my butt. I don't even know what it is, right? I wouldn't even know what was going on.
But that's how I met Lauren at the Y. She was, a trainer there, and she lifts weights, and and her and I, we'd listen to music. But my point is, it's that I hate using the word safe because safe connotates that they're not going to be penalized, or it's that dialogue, the open dialogue. No, you opened your mouth and you said something that is very racist and hurtful. And you think you're immune from getting any repercussions because, oh, I didn't mean to say that. Yes, you did. I'm sorry. I'm very, pessimistic when it comes to that, but that's just my take. And I appreciate Lauren sharing that information because, like she says, you see her and people are like, oh, well, you have nothing to worry about. You're a privileged white lady, but no.
No. And it's so complicated. And I would add, because there is a certain elephant in the room that we haven't been talking about. It's an orange one. And his rhetoric and the way that he conveys his ideas and the way that he empowers certain groups of people is a Pandora's box that we may never close. And I will say that it did not start with him. So think about it this way. Paul Ryan, I hate to go straight political, but it's important for this particular point. Paul Ryan once said that there is a culture that is a lazy culture against work in our inner cities.
Right.
Right? So that's a euphemism. Right? So he's saying that black people are lazy.
Right.
So if Trump goes out and says black people are lazy, he's saying how it is.
Right.
But we've already been hearing it in this
the coded language
euphemistic coded language, and so finally someone has the courage to say what we really believe. And this language, I went to a high school a few years ago to talk about this, that if you speak like this, and I actually mean this too, you're planting the seeds of genocide. That when you dehumanize in language, that is the first step. It may not lead to extermination, but think about what it's led to already.
Right.
We have children still in cages at the border. We have women reportedly having forced hysterectomies. The way that we talk about non-white Americans, it's created a backlash, but it has also empowered people to say and do things that years ago were unimaginable, even though the hatred was still there, because it's being said in a public level, it's being said at the highest levels. There were bumper stickers saying "Make racists afraid again." Like I saw that on a car, and that actually really appealed to me, in the sense that what we say actually matters. And again, going back to Doug's really lovely metaphor of the lake, you put a word, you put a concept out there, and that ripples. So I ask teenage students all the time, how many of you have said, "That is so gay"?
Right. Right.
Well, what did you really want to say? Do you want to say that was stupid? Or then why did you choose that word?
Right.
Right. So already there's this dehumanizing impulse. And when you call somebody out on it, right, they're not at the moment of wanting to act violent. They're trying to say it was a joke. But the joke is one of power relations.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
You're telling me I need to relax and not be offended by everything. But it's not simply being offended. I'm fearful for violence against me because this is an act of violence that you're putting out into the world that may come back to me at a certain point, or my neighbor or someone else. And that's why we're upset. I've been called lots of names in my life. Living in Virginia was an eye-opening experience for me. And I can handle names. I can't handle the fear for my safety.
Correct.
And so it's not up for us to decide at every moment whether or not you're trying to hurt my feelings or trying to harm me. That's exhausting.
Right.
And I'm saying that as a white guy. Right? So imagine if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, you're a woman of color, you're part of the LGBTQ community. That's multiplied by 1,000,000 times.
Right.
So it's not simply our feelings being hurt. We feel threatened when you do that. And we have history, and we have our current political moment that causes that fear for us. It's justified.
Right. Fear is real. Yeah, it is. founded in truth and reality, no doubt.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry for the Jeremiah and the soapbox. preaching.
No, not at all. And I think we need to bring you back on for another show because you talk about a lot of great points. And, I just wanted to add this before we move on to our last question, but Lauren says the same thing. They happened because they didn't think she was Jewish and they thought they were in company of like-minded people. And then when they find out, their face turns bright red. And how do you need to hold those people accountable? Because if they're saying that to you, what are they saying amongst their circle of friends? What are they thinking? What are they believing? And they always say, racist jokes or jokes like that are jokes, but they're really meant in real life. So I appreciate Lauren for sharing her experiences as well with us. But
and that's where dialogue is helpful too, because
Right.
I find in those spaces I like to ask my interlocutors, what are you hoping to achieve by that? Like, how would you like me to respond? What and what?
That's a good point.
And like, because you're controlling my experiences. And think about the power and violence in determining someone else's experiences.
Right.
We have a history of that. And I don't want to presume in Lauren's case who her interlocutors are, but there's also sexism. There, it's not just anti-Semitism and other forms of racism, but I just ask people, like, what do you want from me?
Right.
I'm like, if you say the rejoinder is, well, if you said something to me, I wouldn't be offended. Because you're in the majority,
right?
You're not under threat. You don't have to carry the backpack of your identity everywhere you go.
It's not even an equivalent, comment or comparison.
No, and you really want to help people come to that place. And it's hard because some days I'm like Rage Against the Machine angry, right? I want to throw truth grenades. I'm going to get in your face. And in other days, I want to be charitable. Definitely on work days, right? I can't be Rage Against the Machine at work, but there are some days where I want to be charitable because I do care about the person and want to walk them along with me. Because I also want to get a sense of where my reaction is. Am I projecting too much onto that?
It humanizes you.
I want to be in that relationship, and it's hard work. Like it just doesn't stop.
But we appreciate your work, Ben, and all that you're doing. And you are, gem dropping today, as they say. And hopefully we can continue the dialogue, maybe at another show. But all good things must come to an end. And so we are going to close off with something that's a little bit more lighthearted. And the same question we ended off with Max is, which artist would you have perform an album about your life and why?
That was such a hard question for me.
It's so interesting that people say that. And I'm like, really? That's interesting.
Well,
okay.
My life is a cacophony of genres and artists. and I feel a lot of anxiety to show that I have the right music tastes. And,
Never. This is real talk. Your free space. So give us something.
I am going to give you something. And I talked to my wife beforehand because I was having a lot of anxiety about it.
You put a lot into it. Yeah.
I know.
I want you to picture the album cover, and it's a painting of Bob Ross. Painting, remember Bob Ross?
Yes.
Painting a tree. And under that tree, and it's in French, it says, "This is not a happy tree." And the title of the album would be "The Mysticism of Ordinary Experience," Ben's story. And it will be performed by Patti LaBelle.
Wow.
Philadelphia roots.
That's true.
Very nice.
She has showed up at various parts of my musical life. And at times I was embarrassed. At times I leaned in and loved it. And I'm just going to say that Patti LaBelle can sing about my mysticism of ordinary experience.
Wow. You really did think into this, and that's a big album. Yeah.
That is. Sounds like a platinum plaque right there. Yep.
I appreciate it.
agree.
I was very nervous about it because I knew that was the only question that people were going to probably really listen to.
I disagree, according to Vernon's comment.
Oh, yeah.
No,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you for the great conversation, Lauren.
And we appreciate it. Yep.
Once again, and perfect. So thank you, Ben. We really appreciate you being on our show. At Witching Hour, we kind of asked you, but you came and you gave us a lot of food for thought.
Definitely.
And a lot to reflect on. Yeah. So we appreciate it, everything that you do for, society in general.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to be here and for all the work that the two of you are doing. I'm going to catch up on all of your episodes.
Yes, please do. And subscribe then. Subscribe.
And I will subscribe right after this. And I won't do it during Zoom meetings.
Not during a Zoom meeting,
That would help. That would help a lot. So thank you, Ben. We really appreciate you.
Ben, we appreciate you. Thank you.
Happy holidays, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Yes. So, speaking of YouTube,
subscribe.
Yes, subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yes, I just said that. I told Ben, and I said, Ben, subscribe, and Max, subscribe, and everyone else.
Yes, and if you have any comments or questions, you have a topic you would like us to discuss, our email is realtalkourspace@gmail.com. So, very insightful topic today, Doug.
Yeah, like I said, a lot to think about for sure. So you've got, kind of ramped up from, like I said, that lived experience that Max shared. Pretty much her, her story about, growing up in Baltimore. And, I think it was a nice nice entry point to, Ben kind of picked up from there and then started, bringing that social justice aspect. And it said really just a lot of weight on the conversation. And, topics that you and I have discussed before. But I think it brings it back to the gravity of the times we live in. And like you said, we got this election coming up. So certainly a lot for folks to think about and reflect upon. And I certainly appreciate the time we had with our guest today. So, and you said, yes.
Next week.
Next week. Okay, I was going to get into it. Looks like because next week we're going to continue with our Maryland Stories theme. We're going to talk about the Hampton National Historic Site is the way it really comes up on the website. But there's a lot of history there. And some of the history involves possibly it's the largest private home in America by 1790. Okay, that's a possibility. And it's a Hampton mansion on that site. And if you think about that time period and a mansion, how did that mansion come to be? How was that mansion maintained? So we're talking about enslaved African Americans in particular. And probably some other folks doing labor on that land. But we're going to talk next week about that legacy, that history. And we're really going to be looking through the lens of really two artists and some work that they've done with fellow artists and with students. So we're going to have Sherry Fisher. She'll be here. And also Vernon Faines, who was part of our discussion this evening. So we'll have Sherry and Vernon here to give their perspectives on the work that they've done, the experience that they've had around, we call it Hampton Plantation, because that's exactly how it operated. So that'll be next week's discussion. So we're looking forward to that. Hopefully you all will come back and join us for that.
Yes. So today was a great intro to, what Maryland has to offer. And so hopefully, you'll tune in next week again. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Real Talk, Our Space. We would love to see you next week. And for now, we would bid you adieu and not until next week. Have a good week, Doug. We have a long rest of the week here, and have a good night.
Yes, we do. Have a good night, all. Take care.
All right. Bye.